Welcome to our Paranormal Afterlife. This is our Paranormal Afterlife, and I'm your host Simon Bowen. There is an Our Paranormal Afterlife Facebook group, and if you'd like to join, you'd be very welcome. And remember, you can enjoy the extended version of this episode ad-free, along with over 100 hours of extended episodes on Patreon. This week, I'm talking to Dr. Anona Blackwell about her book, From Medic to Mystic, the true story of an academic physician's journey into the paranormal. Dr. Blackwell is a highly respected Lancet-published academic physician. She was awarded a fellowship of the Royal College of Physicians for her clinical excellence and was invited to join the Royal College of Physicians Integrated Health Committee in 2006. Two of her research papers have permanently changed UK clinical practice. Hi Anona, thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's my pleasure, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So we're going to talk about your book. It's called From Medic to Mystic, the true story of an academic physician's journey into the paranormal. And that really is true. You were an academic physician and you reached really high levels, didn't you, with the things in the Lancet and what have you. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I came from very humble beginnings, really. My father was a market gardener, but he was actually a bus driver. And we had just 3 acres in Abergavenny. My mother had a market stall. And we lived hand to mouth, really. We lived in... it's actually quite funny looking back on it now, but it was little more than a tin shed. It was a corrugated tin shed with wooden cladding on the inside. And it was actually part of a village built for the men who built a local reservoir in 1913. So you can tell it was pretty... and when they'd finished building the reservoir, they took the sheds down and people bought them. And I was brought up in one of them. So really, it was almost like third world poverty. And and so I felt that the only way out of poverty was education. I was too fat to think I'd marry someone rich. So no, but I always was a nerd, to be honest, from the time I was little. Although we didn't have books in the house because we couldn't afford them, I was an avid reader. Although I didn't learn to read until I was 8, so I was quite a slow developer. But I can remember even as a teenager reading Albert Einstein, the man and his theories. I was always fascinated by quantum physics, and I'd have my head in a book, or I never went to parties or anything. But anyway, I went to university and I did my first degree in kind of biology, biophysics, and I was about to go to America to study a disease called retinitis pigmentosa as a PhD. And what happened is that I had an impacted wisdom teeth, and you can't think about how teeth can change your life. But I was about to do finals, and instead of having a 21st birthday present, my family said, okay, they'd pay for me to have my wisdom teeth removed in a private hospital so that I wouldn't be suffering whilst doing my finals. And so I had my teeth out, and this one tooth rather, and the pain was absolutely appalling. And someone gave me pethidine. And I thought, isn't that amazing to take someone out of agony into normality? And I thought, oh God, it'd be lovely to be a doctor. And then in the holidays that year, I did a cleaning job in our local hospital. And I was cleaning a floor in outpatients when I saw a woman crying. And I just went to comfort her. And she said that it was a gynae outpatient, that she'd been told that she had a pelvic infection and that she'd never have children. And she was just sobbing, and I couldn't do much. I was only a cleaner, and I thought, oh gosh, wouldn't it be lovely if I was a doctor and could help her? And kind of that planted the seed. And so when I'd done my finals, I asked my professor, could she pull some strings to get me into medical school? But she kind of did. And that year, I then started at Westminster Medical School and eventually qualified. I had a second-class honours 2-1 in biophysics, and then I did medicine at Westminster Med School. I'd always had an academic mindset, did a lot of research and got a couple of Lancet papers there, and then I got a consultant post in Swansea, and I eventually studied how women undergoing termination of pregnancy, if they weren't screened, a lot of them develop pelvic infection. So in a way, I was fulfilling almost like a dream of when I first met that lady years ago who had pelvic infection and couldn't have children. So it was like as if I was doing my little bit to stop it happening in the future. And so, I did well academically. I taught in the medical school as well. But I had a very strong spiritual bent since I was a child.
When you were a child, there was that time you predicted a death at school, wasn't there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, but it started before that. I think because we were poor, I was like almost like autistic in my behaviour, although I don't have autism. And we lived outside the town, so I didn't have any friends. And I would, as a young child, 5, 6-year-old, go and sit under our larch trees where our beehives were, and I just talked to the bees all day. That's what I do for entertainment. And I had a spirit child when I was a kid, friend called Christina, and I used to play with her in our cow shed. I can still remember what she looked like now. And my mother, I used to insist she put a place at our table for her, although I never asked my mother to put food on the plate. But that was as a young child. And then when I was about 17, I had my first proper paranormal experience. And what happened is that I was always very keen to go to school because I felt I had to educate myself. And so I woke up one morning and I said, "Oh, Mum, I don't want to go to school. Somebody's going to die." And I was terrified. It was like a rabbit in front of a truck, as it were. And she said, "Don't be daft," because we didn't have a telephone or anything like that. And anyway, I was really terrified. Went to school. Nobody died. The next morning, I woke up with the same absolute fear. Then I went to school and I told my friends, "Oh, somebody's going to die," And anyway, on the third day, I was absolutely at peace. And I woke up and I said, "It's okay, Mum." I said, "Mr. Sharp has passed away in his sleep." And he was our deputy headmaster, and he'd actually walked home from school and just died in his sleep. And I just felt he was at peace. And when I went to school, he had indeed died. And so, yeah, that was my first truly paranormal. It was kind of, predictive, I suppose.
It's fascinating how this comes out. And was there a time you woke up and you saw your father enter the room?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, the end of the deputy headmaster, Mr. Sharp's story, was that about 6 months after he died, my mother had a market stall, and Mr. Sharp's wife had heard in the school about how I'd predicted her husband's death, and she asked me to go to her house. And I thought this was terribly posh because it was actually a house with brick walls, And I said, I just went in. I said, "Oh, he's sitting in that chair." And she said, "Oh, I thought he was." And then that was that. And then really nothing until, I can tell you, it was June the 18th, 1975. And I'd just done a long shift, because we used to do shifts that would be anything up to 56 hours we were on duty, and we had very little sleep during that time. And I just collapsed onto the bed, absolutely exhausted, in St. Stephen's Hospital, where we used to have our own rooms, And my dad came into the room. I just saw him, and all he said was, "Phone your mother." That was all. And then he disappeared into the wall. And then I can remember saying, "Oh, Dad, I'm so tired. She'll be out in the field planting cabbages. I just don't have the energy," is what my response was. But then a few moments later, the phone went, and it was a friend of my father's who told me Dad had just died in the field. So yeah, that was pretty scary. But I don't know. I just took it as normal. I don't know. Maybe it was just the way I'd been brought up, because my dad was a dowser, and he was very good at grafting fruit trees and things like that. And he was actually he was psychic too, although he never admitted it. Yeah.
You had near-death experience, didn't you? Was it quite a short one?
Very short. It wasn't in fact, I'm not even sure if in the book whether I call it an NDE, really. It was very much the beginning of one. And I'd been given an antiemetic because I'd it was a daft story, really, but I don't even know if I wrote the whole truth or nothing but the truth. But what happened is that one of my colleagues was leaving, and I had 2 glasses of wine one evening in the doctor's mess, and I wasn't complete non-drinker because we couldn't afford alcohol, and it made me feel really rough the following morning. And one of my colleagues said, take some, I think it was Stemetil he gave me, actually, an antiemetic, because I was feeling nauseated. And I had a bad reaction to it, and had something what they call an oculogyric crisis, where your neck goes back, and I actually became unconscious. And when that happened, all I can remember was being very much at peace. I didn't see any darkness, any light rather. There was just darkness. But I was aware of a very loving presence who said, if you want to, you can stay here. And I wanted to stay wherever it was, because it was like floating in nothingness, I suppose. And there's no fear. And I thought, oh yeah, I'd love to stay. But then we had a discussion about the effect it would have on my mother. And because my dad had just died, if she'd lost me as well, she would have died as well. And I thought, I can't inflict that pain on her. So I said, okay, I better go back. But then they warned me that my life would be very hard, which it has been. There's not much joy in it. All I've done is work, really.
So before you had that, you were having kind of paranormal experiences and seeing apparitions and things. After that experience, did you find that perhaps your ability in that direction was kind of supercharged?
Well, that happened when I was doing my house jobs, okay? And that was, junior doctors. And that was I think that was the only experience I had while I was at St. Stephen's. But then when I got a registrar post at St. Thomas's, that's when weird stuff started to happen. And it was, I think, looking back on it now, I was doing an awful lot of research, and I was spending a great deal of time on my own. And it's almost as though for me, I need to be on my own in order, it's rather like trying to connect. So there's a lot of noise in a room. You can't hear a still small voice, I suppose. And when you're living on your own, you can meditate more, go into a quiet space. And I think that's what happened, because when I was writing my research papers, I was reading a lot of books, a lot of papers from chaps who'd written in the 1890s, that sort of thing. And you almost go into a timelessness. And it was at that time that I started getting paranormal experiences. I think some of your listeners probably find this boring, but one of the funniest was when, excuse me, I was doing a female clinic, and a lady came to see me, and if you can imagine a female version of Michael Caine, I can't do a Cockney accent, but it was, you can imagine a Cockney accent. And anyway, it was me and her, a desk, X-ray machine, and that was it, really. 2 chairs and a table. And as I was talking to her, she had thrush, and I was asking her about the intimate questions. And I suddenly became aware of a man standing next to me. I just saw him kind of edge on, really. He's always on my right side for some reason. And he was quite dominant kind of guy. Silent, but very almost aggressive, as it were. And I said to her, the patient, I said, I can't go on, there's a man in the room. Now, you can imagine, I was at a teaching hospital wearing a white coat. A normal patient would run out, this doctor's crazy. But in fact, what she said in a Cockney accent was, don't you worry, Doc, that's Arthur. He's my late husband, and he's a bloody nuisance. He follows me everywhere. And she said, you tell him to bugger off, Doc. And she said that in a Cockney accent, so it was very funny. And so I mentally told him to bugger off, and he did. and that was that. But so that wasn't very, very spiritual. It was just funny. But then another time there was a lady who, I remember she was head of English at a private school somewhere in south of England. And she'd seen one of my male colleagues who'd wanted to go off to lunch, and he said, there's a lady there, she's got thrush, will you treat her? So lady comes in, and I suppose I can't remember how old she was. I was young then, and so people in their 40s seemed old, but she was in her probably late 40s. And I explained to her she had thrush, and I gave her the treatment that she needed. And she got up she got up and put her hand on the door handle to leave. And suddenly, within a flash, there was this it was like a big egg, oval shaped. It's egg shape, of huge to my right, and it was golden and glowing, and I felt intense love coming from it. And I can't actually remember if I saw a figure inside it, but I knew it was this woman's mother. And so I said to the lady, "Would you mind coming back in?" And she did, and I told her I'd just seen a spirit that wanted to send her a lot of love. And the patient then, she got up and hugged me and was crying. And she said her mother had died 3 months previously, and she'd had this apparition as well, but was feeling she was going mad. And she said, "I didn't tell my doctor because I'll lose my job." So that was quite a nice experience. So that was cool.
Was there also a time your dad said that he nearly drowned, and he kind of had a near-death experience?
Yeah, years ago. Yeah, I can remember my dad. This is me remembering things from the 60s now, that he said that he had nearly drowned and that he just saw his whole life running before him. That's all I can recall, though, because we're going back to the 1960s,
Yeah, that is kind of typical of near-death experiences, isn't it? Having that life review. You went on the Healer Practitioner Association International 2-year course. So what was that like?
Oh, well, it was really very good. So what actually happened, the reason it happened is that I was a consultant in Swansea by then, and one night I had a similar experience to what had happened when I'd known that my deputy headmaster had died. And it was a kind of dream, but a very lucid dream. And I was in the dream, I was discussing with one of the nurses the replacement for a nurse who'd passed away. So I knew this guy had died because it was almost as though I travelled to the future, as it were. And I was so convinced, I thought, oh my God, the staff are going to be so upset. So I went into work very early, and normally I would be at work perhaps 8 o'clock-ish, and I was there by 6:30, and just the cleaners were there. I can remember them saying, "Oh, what are you doing, Dr. Blackwell?" And for my sins, I did lie. I said, "Oh, I've got a lot of paperwork to catch up with," because I thought, I can't exactly say if I had a funny dream. But anyway, I waited there, and then after an hour or so, the phone went and staff were coming in, and this poor chap had passed away in his sleep. And that got me quite concerned. So I thought, I was really quite upset, because I thought, I don't want to know that people are going to die, because if you can't do anything about it, you just don't want to know, And so I went to see a spiritualist minister called Zena, and she was also a high priestess in Wicca, but a thoroughly good egg, a lovely lady. She's passed over now. And I told her what had happened. And she said, "Oh, this is spirit telling you you've got to train as a spiritual healer." There wasn't anything financial for her to gain. But what she said is that I'd probably continue to get these dreams. It was the way that spirit world were pushing me to train as a spiritual healer. So I did that. It was 1 day a week. I can't remember how many. It was like terms, I suppose. And we would be taught about spiritual philosophy and the legalities of whatever. And then we would have sessions lasting about 2 hours, where we'd go to this particular, remember it was called the Fairy Hill, something or other. And it's just a big room, and there were about 7 of us in there with nice music. And we'd have people come there who wanted healing. And I just put my hands on their shoulders, and I usually pray to Archangel Michael. And that was quite interesting. I don't know if you want me to tell you something strange that actually happened towards the end of my training.
Yeah.
Because what happened one day, it was in the last 3 months of my training, when we used to have another person who was a fully trained HPAI trainer, and she would watch us as we were doing our healing. And I was having coffee in the med school after an academic meeting, and I spoke to one of the ladies there, one of the professors, and we were just chatting about various academic pursuits. And I looked at my watch and I said, "Oh, I've got a spiritual healing evening class. I've got to go now." And she looked so shocked. I could have told her I was doing pole dancing. She probably would have accepted that. But anyway, and she was fascinated. She said, "How on earth can somebody with a science degree, etc., be interested in the paranormal?" And I said, well, I explained a little bit. And I said, "Well, actually, I need guinea pigs. So if you want to come along tonight, I'll show you what we do." And she was very well dressed, and she looked like Margaret Thatcher in her prime, if you can imagine. Very, very professional with a suitcase, etc. And so, anyway, she said she'd come along. And when she did that evening, she'd come straight from work. And I could tell this poor woman was way outside her comfort zone because, she looked the archetypal professor. And there were candles there and music and incense. And anyway, I thanked her for coming. And just she sat down. And I can remember putting my hands. She was wearing a suit. I can remember she was wearing a very tweedy suit, I think. I put my hands just above her shoulders, and I usually do a little prayer. And after a while, I realised I was actually on a boat, and I could see a whole load of things around me, buildings, etc. And I felt quite wobbly because I was on the boat, and I felt intense love for this individual. And when we'd come round, at the end of about a quarter of an hour or so, I said, "Oh, that was weird." I said, "I can't pick up any health issues with you, but and I told her where I was and what I could see, and she became really very distressed because I just described where a close relative of hers had worked, and what he would have seen during the course of his work. And anyway, about a month later, I spoke to her again, and she said that with her particular specialty, it was a very, very left-brain specialty. And she was like Newtonian physics. And I had shown her a black swan, as it were, when all the swans in her life were white, and completely altered her mindset within seconds, because I think she'd come to the meeting because she was intrigued as to why I'd find it interesting. And I think she was very much a skeptic, and what had happened had really been quite dramatic for her.
So do you feel there's a very materialist viewpoint that dominates the medical profession, and most of them would hear these stories and say, "Oh, don't be ridiculous"?
Well, I think it's changing because, as you can imagine, amongst my friends, most of them have had paranormal experiences, if not all of them. And some of them are very, very senior doctors who wouldn't want their stories told. And I think it's because in society as a whole, we still are materialistic. Unless you can, see it, touch it, smell it, etc., then they don't believe it exists. And I think it's fear of being ridiculed. But I suppose I was lucky in that I suppose to get anything in the Lancet is extremely hard because it is actually the world's most recognised medical journal above the New England Journal of Medicine. And so I had a very strong academic pedigree. I'd also been on loads of committees. And I suppose my sense of humour helped as well. Very practical. I was brought up milking cows and cleaning out the cow shed. So I'm very earthbound on one level. And so, I was accepted, because of my academic background, I think. With most doctors, I suspect there are an awful lot of doctors who have these experiences, because I know of quite a few of them, but they just don't want to come out of the closet. And I'm hoping with my book, people will open their eyes a little bit to looking on things that are really important in life rather than just acquisition of material things,
So you had that experience of colleagues coming to you in private, there's just the two of you, and they're saying, "I haven't told anyone this, but..."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, there's a whole chapter I wrote called Other People's Paranormal Experiences. That was my editor felt it really, I need to put it in the second book. So I'll see if this one takes off. I will write it. I've got loads of stories. People have told me what things that have happened to them. And so I am collecting them. So they do that. Yeah. they open up to me, whereas they wouldn't open up to, their own doctor probably. In fact, there's a chap called Ian Rubinstein, Dr. Ian Rubinstein, and he's retired, but he is working part-time still, and he's written a book, and he is both a practicing GP and a medium. He practices as a medium as well. Now, he's written a book, and curiously, we got in touch again recently because he read an article about me in Psychic News and then got in touch, and it turned out I'd actually been on email terms with him back in, I think it was 2007, when I bought his book. And he is extremely open about his paranormal experiences. So I think we just got to get it out to the the regular population, the man on the Clapham omnibus, so that really doctors will come out of the closet. They need to use intuitive skills, and experienced doctors, they know when someone's ill if they see them regularly. So there are a lot of doctors who have skills that they wouldn't necessarily admit to.
So was there a time when you kind of got a spiritual direction that said you've got to go to Edinburgh for healing?
Yeah, that was weird. I had an experience where I had what they call a forced kundalini, and it was at a friend's dinner party of all things. But anyway, and I felt that my soul was partly dislodged from my physical body, and everybody looking at me would think, oh, you're fine, and I was behaving in a normal way, but I just felt as though my soul had disappeared, has gone off somewhere. And I was in my kitchen in Swansea doing a stir fry, and I suddenly had this message. I'm pretty sure it was Archangel Michael saying you have to go to Edinburgh to a particular. It was an NLP workshop, and because there'll be someone there who can, bring your soul fully back into your body. And I didn't want to go because it was winter. I think it was November, and I'd already been on a similar NLP course in London. So I was arguing. They said, no, you got to go. So anyway, I booked up. I went there, and for the first 4 or 5 days, it was just conventional NLP teaching. And then the last couple of days was a little bit more esoteric. I think it was shamanic trance work or something. I can't remember now. It's a long time ago. But I remember there was about 130 of us there. And the teacher said to us to divide ourselves into small groups, which we did. And he wanted us to do something called mind melding. Now, to me, that sounds like absolute nonsense. But what he said is that we had to pair up, and in the group we would have to say what we were good at, and then if someone else had a gift that you wanted, then you just hold hands and try and transfer that knowledge to them. And I said that I was a good public speaker and that I could make really good mint sauce. And the guy next to me said he was very good at housework and he wanted the mint sauce recipe. And I thought, I don't want to be good at housework because I hate housework. So I didn't want to share with him. But the lady opposite me, her name was Sharon, she said she could talk to angels. And I thought, yeah, I could do with that. So anyway, we just sat together and kind of prayed, I suppose, for a couple of minutes at most. And I didn't feel a thing. But afterwards, in the coffee break, she said to me, I've been looking at you all week. And she said, she lived, I don't want to say too much because I haven't been in touch with her, but not in the UK, shall we say. And she said she'd been told by Archangel Michael to come to this conference because there would be someone there who needed healing. And she said, you are that person. And she said that's the only reason she'd gone to this quite expensive workshop. And then, so during the coffee break, I said, oh, fine. And it was almost like two old friends because I said, I've been looking for you all week because Michael told me the same thing. So anyway, she put a hand on my head, trying to think now which was. She put her left hand on my head and the right hand just over my heart area. And I could feel a kind of warmth. And then she almost became Archangel Michael. And he said, you were this was meant to happen to raise my spiritual awareness, the experience I'd had. but that I was not meant to be harmed so much. And then he said, I'm sorry, I took my eye off the ball. That was the actual words. And then after that, I felt completely normal again. And it sounds weird, unless you've been through that experience, it doesn't make sense. Part of me, my left brain says, oh, but it happened. And that's why I wrote it. And I wrote about it. A lot of the stories in my book, I did actually write at the time. And I had, inches and inches of documents over the years that I collected.
Have you ever wondered what happens after we die? In my new book, Verified Near-Death Experiences, Proof of an Afterlife, I share 30 incredible stories of people who were clinically dead, some with no heartbeat, no brain activity, yet returned with knowledge that was later verified. These accounts challenge everything we think we know about consciousness and the afterlife. It's available now as an ebook, paperback and audiobook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble and other good bookshops. Again, it's called Verified Near-Death Experiences, Proof of an Afterlife, and I hope you check it out. Do you say in the book that whenever you saw a patient who had no real medical reason to see you, you took it as a red flag?
Yeah, that was interesting because very early on, and it's part of the reason I needed to write the book, was very early on in my spiritual journey. I was very busy clinic. They were always busy. And a lady came in who was probably in her 40s, and a little boy followed her. And I remember he had a white T-shirt and navy or black trousers. I can't remember. And although he ran past me, past my right-hand side, so I saw him edge on, as it were, but I could actually see the front of his face as well. I don't know why. But anyway, he skidded past me and just disappeared into the wall. And I just thought, oh, that's interesting. But because the clinic was busy and I didn't want to upset my patient, I didn't say anything. But during the course of the interview, I was asking her about her gynecological and obstetric history. And I said, she said, oh, I had a little boy, but he died in a tragic accident. And again, I won't go into the details because I don't want her to be identified. But anyway, she said he died in a tragic accident. And then she said, and these were the exact words, funnily enough, doctor, I've just been to see a medium, and she said he follows me everywhere. And I thought, oh dear, I saw her. And in retrospect, I think spirit had got it. She didn't have anything wrong with her. I didn't need to examine her. She didn't have any risk factors. And even she didn't know why she'd actually come to the clinic, And I didn't tell her. And I felt that I should have done. Because if I'd told her I'd seen the little boy, she'd have believed it and probably had a great deal of solace from it, But I lacked the courage. And I remember the next day trying to find the patient. So I was going to contact her, but unfortunately she hadn't given her contact details. And I felt guilty every day since. And I did a deal then with spirit. I just sat down and prayed. And I said, look, I'm really sorry that's happened. I know I can't take that negative karma back. But I said, if you promise me that I'm telling patients everything I see, that I won't harm them and that it won't have any negative effect on me either, because I was still paying off a mortgage. I said, I'll always tell them. And after that, I always did. And I never, ever had any problems. So luckily, but I'm saying luck. No, I think it was a deal I did with the spirit world. If they wanted me to communicate, then I would,
So you feel that people were guided to you by spirit?
Yeah. At the time, yeah. I remember one lady, it was quite funny because she was in her, I would say, late 50s. And this was a regular VD clinic, so most of the girls there were quite young. And I asked her what the problem was. And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, have you got any symptoms? So we went through all the various, no. And I asked her, had she been unfaithful to her husband? Whereupon she started laughing and said no, but they'd been married since they were, in their late teens. And she thought that was really quite an amusing question to ask. And it had taken her a couple of bus changes to get to me. And I said, have you any idea why you've come to my clinic? And she said, no. And I said, did you ask for me? And she said, no, I just asked for the next available appointment, and it happened to be with me, you see. And I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe this woman's got psychiatric issues, keep wanting to go to a VD clinic, but she looked quite sane. And anyway, she suddenly looked at me and said, I know who you are. I said, do you? And she said, you've had your hair cut and you've dyed it blonde. I said, yeah, but that was for a couple of years now. And it turned out that I'd given her a message 2 years previously at a circle in one of I think it was Havenicoid, which was a spiritual centre in the Swansea Valley. And what had happened, there was about 40 people in a circle, and it was one of the very early on in my spiritual journey. And a medium was there giving messages. And in the end, he said, has anyone got a message for anyone in the group? And I had a message for what turned out to be the patient eventually. And I just whispered it to my friend because I was too shy. And I said, I think I got a message for the lady over there. And my friend who was with me said, hey, she's got a message. Oh, God, so I had to go say it then. So I said to this lady, I said, it's very strange. I said, I've got a lady who is got mother energy, and she died recently of breast cancer. But she's actually, the message she's given me is to tell you not to indulge your mother too much because it's not really appreciated. And so it was odd because I thought, well, I got this woman here who seems to be her mother, but giving this lady a message saying about her living mother, if you see what I mean. But it turned out this lady then burst into tears and said that her aunt had died recently of breast cancer. And the last thing she'd said to her was, you're more like a mother to me than my own mother. So, yeah. So that's why she came. I think she had some spiritual problem, which I did some counselling, and that was it. So in a way, it's almost as though her spirit guide had found me and got her to make phone calls and make an appointment with this strange woman.
Yeah. I think something else you say in the book is that all the dead folk that you've encountered appear to be perfectly fit, even though they may have had some terrible accident or something.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. It's almost, the best thing I can say about that is that I had one lady who was in her 70s. I thought she was old, but God, I'm in my mid-70s now. But anyway, no, she came to see me, and I was doing a vulval clinic at the time, and she had a problem down below. And when she came in, she just tottered in and sat down, and I was very much aware of a man wearing a trilby hat and a long, dark raincoat standing at the door, and very much I felt intimidated by him. I was just aware of his presence, really. And he was just staring at his wife. But anyway, I asked her, she'd had a hysterectomy, and I'd asked her when she'd had it. And she said, I can't remember, doctor. She said, I've just asked my late husband, he's standing next to you. And so she did, telepathically, and then told me. And then she said, I asked her about her husband, and she said all her life, when she'd married him, he'd been in a wheelchair. And he was paralyzed during their entire marriage. And I said, that's odd. I said, because he's standing there now. And she said, yes, as soon as he died, he was healthy, which is a bit of an oxymoron, really, isn't it? So, that seems to be the case. But what was interesting about that is that as the lady was leaving, she said, she was talking about her husband, and one of the nurses said to me, don't you think you ought to refer her to a psychiatrist because she keeps on about her late husband being with her? And I said, oh, I hope not, I said, because I saw him too, so we'd both be seeing the psychiatrist, So funny things like that used to happen.
So in the book, you talk about meeting Prince Charles. Can you tell us what that was like?
Yeah, that was lovely. He's a really nice guy. I'm so sorry that he's poorly. Now, what happened is that I ended up, I did a study with one of my medical students on the complementary therapy training needs of medical students, basically. And we published it. And I had actually, when I designed the study, I'd been in touch with an old medical school chum of mine called Professor George Lewis, And I asked him for a bit of help in designing the questionnaire, which he did. And then it was published. And then, so I'd got in touch with him, even though I hadn't spoken to him for years, and since med school. And he said, he was chairman at the time of the Royal College of Physicians Integrated Health Committee. And he said, well, I think because I was FRCP, it'd be nice if you could join us. So I did. And as a result of that, I got to meet one of the representatives from Prince Charles, as he was then, Prince Charles's Foundation for Integrated Health. And part of that institute, they did studies where they would take doctors and medical students to study alternative medicine. You had to pay, but it was just a group they organised. And I went on one with a couple of medical students that I'd trained to study Ayurvedic medicine in Kerala. And after that, the group of GPs, there were about 30 odd of us. I was the only consultant, and there was a couple of medical students. We were invited to Clarence House to meet Prince Charles. But we started off in the Liberal Club and were told you must, about security. So we were searched and given little cards and told when you first meet him, you have to say, pleased to meet you, Your Royal Highness, and then curtsy or whatever. And after that, you can just call him Sir. And also don't touch him, So there you go. So I remember, because I'm quite plump, I'd bought a suit, a kind of extra large suit, and I had these new shoes on, and it was quite a walk from a Liberal Club up to Clarence House. And by the time I got there, I had massive blisters on my feet, and there were nowhere to sit down. But anyway, Prince Charles comes in, and he starts talking, and I started shaking, you see. And because I was nervous, and they were had these cups of tea, and I was rattling my cup, and I said, I'm awfully sorry, sir. I said, I'm just rather nervous. And he said, Dr. Blackwell, don't worry, I have that effect on a lot of people. He's got a lovely voice, And anyway, I said, it's no good. I said, I'm still shaking. Can I hold your hand? So I'm not afraid of you, you see. And God, it's bizarre, isn't it? A senior consultant asking to hold his hand. So he said, yeah, go ahead. He gave me his hand. Got lovely man's hands, like a farmer, because I was brought up in the farming community. And so I just held his hand. And then I said, can I read your energy field? Which is what I did. I've picked up quite a few things, but I've only written about one or two of them. And one of the things I picked up was the energy of Merlin behind him, you see. And I told him about that and a few other things. But anyway, he then went on to say how come a GU physician ended up as a spiritual healer. And I told him a bit of the story. And on one occasion, I had a patient came in with the spirit of a horse and whatever. And he was fascinated. And after a while, he said, don't your colleagues think you were rather mad? And I said, I was chairman of the Trust Consultants Committee. I got 3 Lancet papers. I got higher award for clinical excellence. I'm on various committees, blah, blah, blah. So I said, when I tell my colleagues that a patient came in with the spirit of a horse, they asked me what type of horse, you see. So he was laughing. He then has to go off to the other group. And towards the end, when he was about to leave, he came up to me, grabbed my hand, and he said, are you still afraid of me? And I thought, by this time, I was totally in love with him, But I said, no, I'm all right now. And he said, you never told me what Merlin energy is, you see. So I said, then he was about 3 meters away from me. I looked at him from his feet to the top of his head. And I said to him, do you really want to know, babe? And I did it in the sexiest voice I could produce. And then I realized I just called him babe. And I said, I'm so sorry, babe. Babe, sir, I don't want to be locked up in the tower. He then burst out into laughter. And we had a photograph taken together, which was rather nice. But yeah, it was a very cool experience. And I just hope he gets better so that he can have a bigger influence for the good, really.
So you have quite a lot of information in your book on psychometry. But before we go into that, could you explain what psychometry is?
Yeah, I've written about it in the book, but basically it's kind of the ability, usually to hold an object that has belonged to someone. And when you hold the object, that it will, you can pick up memories of the owner of the object. So it's like tuning into the energy of objects, but I think you can do it with the energy of people as well. And the best example of this is when I was first introduced to it, was a friend of mine took me to a place, a place called Town Hill Community Hall many years ago in Swansea. And I was very much a newbie, and there was about 30 or 40 in a circle. We arrived a little bit late, and my friend, who was a medium, we sat next to each other, and someone was passing around a tray with a scarf over it, and various objects were under the scarf. And they were offering this tray to various people, and some people were taking bits off it. And my friend said to me, "Oh, take something." So I took there was a ring. So I had this ring, and then I didn't realize that if you picked up an object, you then had to give a psychometric reading to the group. My friend hadn't told me this because I'd never done it before. I had no idea. So anyway, I was a bit nervous, and when it came to my turn, I just tossed this ring in my hand, and I picked up. I said, all I'm picking up is that whoever owns this has recently been to Stonehenge and had their photograph taken on a flat stone. And one of the ladies in the group said, "Yeah, that's exactly what had happened." That's all I picked up. But I did have other experiences that was kind of similar. So yeah, that's psychometry in a nutshell. It's the ability to pick up experiences that the owners of objects have had by tuning into the energy of the object. But I don't know how it works, but it's amazing.
And didn't you have a couple of times where you did a reading in a group setting, and what was coming through, you felt like, I don't think I should say this in front of all these people?
Yeah. A couple of times. Well, it was a positive occasion was when I think it was a lady called Barbara Mickle-John Free was in a huge body, mind, spirit fair, and she was telling everyone is psychic. And what she did was to hold hands with the person next door to you and take some nice deep breaths and then tell them about themselves. So really, that's the psychometry of the individual, is reading their energy field. And then I told her, I remember I said to her, I'd never met her before at all. And I said to her, you've got a little bit of problems in your marriage. You've got 3 children, but none of them are with you. I can see you living in a terraced house, but you've got horses in livery. And then I said, I can see you writing a book, but I can also smell a lot of baking around you. And every time I told her something, both of them started laughing in a way. And she said, yeah, she was going through a difficult time with her marriage. She had a horse in livery, lived in a terrace house. She used to be a professional baker, and someone had just asked her to write a book. And also she'd had 3 miscarriages. So that is a kind of psychometry of the individual, which was positive. But then I went into another tent where the lady was teaching about psychometry. And she wanted a volunteer from the audience to see if they could do it. And so I volunteered because nobody else would. And I don't mind making a fool of myself. I don't know why that is a gift, I suppose. A lady came in late, and the teacher said to the lady who come in late, she said, "Oh, can I have your spectacles? Because I'd like this lady to read them." So anyway, so she gave me the spectacles, and oh God, I was picking up a whole load of negative stuff. And I didn't want to say, so, but the crowd were there, "Go on, you've got to say." So I said, "Look, I'm terribly sorry," to the woman. I said, "What I'm picking up is about, half a dozen things." And the lady said, "Oh, none of it was true." So I thought, okay. And I said, "Sorry, obviously I'm not very good at this," and sat down again. But then I went to another workshop, which was an hour. And when I came out, the teacher of the psychometry group came running towards me and said, "Oh, I've been looking for you everywhere." She said, "The lady with the spectacles was so impressed. Apparently everything you said was absolutely spot on. And I've told her to go and sit next to that tree." And I could see this woman sitting next to a tree because she wants some healing. So that's what happened. So I don't know. I think if people try these things, sometimes you find that, things do happen. It happened again years later when I was at a tarot reading workshop, and we were reading crystal balls then, that sort of thing. I don't want to bore you too much because I could go on for hours, as you probably get.
Oh, this is great.
I think I'm just boring people by being too talkative.
No, not on this podcast. So you also talk about the psychometry of places, so you can pick up energy.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of this, to be honest, I don't really understand it, and I haven't got that much experience. It's just that I was brought up in a tin shed, no doctors in the family, nobody with a degree, I think, apart from my sister, probably. And we couldn't afford books, and so I was destined probably to work on a market stall. But we lived in this tin shed, and then I subsequently read a book called, I think it was called Stone and Steel in the Black Mountains, and it's the story of how the reservoir, I think it's called the Grindivale Reservoir, near where I live, had been built many, many years ago, and that they actually had a church there, and they had a hospital as well. And from the layout of the bungalow I was brought up I have a feeling that ours could have been the hospital, but that was very vague. But then there was I went to a lecture with a lovely bloke who was a former consultant colleague of mine, Don Williams, and he was president of the Physicians of Mudvie Society. Now, the Mudvie is a village about an hour's drive very much a Welsh rural area, where there were physicians up until, probably less than 100 years ago, going back to medieval times. And what had happened is that it's a myth, really, but a chap was tending his sheep at the side of the lake, and one day a beautiful woman came out of the water, a spirit, and he fell in love with her, blah, blah, blah. And she said, right, he wanted to marry her, and she said, well, I'll marry you, but if you hit me on 3 occasions without due cause, I'll go back into the lake. Well, they got married, they had 3 sons, and then eventually he struck her for no apparent reason. She goes back into the lake. And then one of the sons was walking along the lakeside, and his mother came out and she said, look, I want to give you this book. And it was a book of healing. And he became the first physician of Mudvie. And then it became a tradition that there were, physicians in this area, and people would come from Europe and various other places just to be healed. That was fact, they were herbalists. But then my friend Don Williams looked into, he was brought up in the village, and he was a consultant, and he found there was a clustering, there still is, a lot of doctors, and one I think was a Nobel Prize winner, in that small area. And it's like weird. It's like, why are there still a lot of doctors? And it's almost, I think he puts it down to just the effect that they know about the Physicians of Mudvie. And if a kid is bright, then maybe they'll decide they want to be a doctor. But I'm wondering whether there might be an energy in that area that draws people towards the healing professions. And I think in the book I mentioned about in Neath Port Talbot, how that seems to be an area where Michael Sheen and I can never remember the sorry, there's a couple of others I mentioned, but I can't remember now because I'm getting a bit tired, to be honest.
Oh.
But it's very much around Neath Port Talbot. There's an awful lot of actors have been produced. Elizabeth Taylor's husband, Richard Burton, that's it. Richard Burton and Michael Sheen and a good handful of other actors have come from a small area. And so it's almost as though certain parts of the world have energies which, for some reason, have effect on people's psychology. I don't know, but it's interesting.
So we've been talking about your book. It's called From Medic to Mystic, the true story of an academic physician's journey into the paranormal. And people can get that on Amazon.
Yep. And in fact, they can order it from bookshops as well. So yeah, it's a lot. It really is quite funny. I don't know if you read the opening sentences, but it's all true. A lot of what I've written was I actually wrote at the time because I've been writing. I wrote my first book when I was 13, and it's 42,000 words, and I only found it when my editor came to stay with me, and I was looking through some old documents. So I just love writing. I like writing, about issues in life, but certainly about the paranormal, because it's been so much part of my experience.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thanks again for coming on the podcast.
You've got a lovely voice. You've got lovely tonality, and God bless you.
This week, I was talking to Dr. Anona Blackwell about her book, From Medic to Mystic, the true story of an academic physician's journey into the paranormal. If you want to hear the rest of this amazing interview, you can sign up to Patreon. The Patreon episodes are ad-free, and I release 2 days before the free versions. And please check out my other podcast. It's called the Alien UFO Podcast, and I release new episodes every Monday. You can find it on almost every podcast app. And you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Our Paranormal Afterlife. You'll click on the Patreon button on my homepage at pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. The links are in the show notes. And if you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or via your favourite podcast app to make sure that you don't miss out on any episodes. And thanks for listening.